Yeah.
Hey, Blake, Williford, what's going on, man?
What's up, buddy? I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I appreciate you taking time out of your globetrotting lifestyle to help out some recruiters and sourcers that are inevitably going to send you messages on LinkedIn and so on and so forth.
It happens every day. Yeah.
There we go. That's fantastic. So why don't we start with what your title is, what you do, where you're working, and then we'll kind of dive in a little deeper from there.
Yeah, I'm a senior UX designer, so I basically work on software, like the front end of software, basically driving the user experience and the user interface. I work for a small startup called Polygens. It's a Silicon Valley startup.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's an ed tech company. We're building a platform for mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
and I lead the design team. Um, yeah, that's about it.
Okay, great. So you're on the UI of things, and you said that your title was a UX designer or UI
UX.
designer.
My official title is senior UX designer, but I also do UI. So you could call me a UX UI designer.
What is the difference between a UX? What's the difference between UX and UI for kind of noobs out there?
That's a good question. I almost feel like I need to start from the beginning, but basically,
Please do.
the discipline of user experience in a general sense came about because in the early days of software, you think about the 80s and the 90s, in the early days of personal computing, software was just crap. It was there was a lot of usability issues. There's a lot of just scrapped together, put together crap by mostly engineers and
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurs and people who didn't really think about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it emerged as a discipline to make software more usable, more easy to use, more intuitive, more simple, more aesthetically pleasing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of emerged out of other design disciplines like product design, industrial design, but it's become a very, very important discipline in today's age because we constantly are using software on our phones, on the web, everywhere. Okay, and so it's become a discipline that's gotten to be very popular. Now, the user experience part of the process of design is kind of defining uh, what is the person going to actually experience in the software? What is their journey using the software?
Mm-hmm.
The user interface is more specifically like, what does the actual screen look like? What are the buttons they're clicking on? And what is the flow from screen to screen and so forth? So UI design is a lot more specific. It's a lot more related to the aesthetics and the look and feel and the interaction of the software. Whereas user experience is more broad. Sometimes user experience also involves UX research, where you're talking to customers, you're understanding what they go through, what their pain points are, how their lives can be improved.
Are all these
How,
aspects of being a UX designer, if you're a UX designer, does that automatically mean that you know UI and also do UX, or is there kind of people, are these specializations that you can kind of just be siloed into, or maybe that just matters on the company? Tell me about that.
that's a good question. Yeah, it depends on the company, really. I mean, I think it tends to be where the larger companies segment out those roles. So if you work for Google or something, you'd probably have like a dedicated UX researcher role, a dedicated UX or interaction designer role, and
Mm-hmm.
then a dedicated UI designer,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe even like a dedicated UI engineer. So you have kind of like the full process covered in multiple roles. I personally don't like that because I like all aspects of the process. And so that's why I work for a startup. At startups, you tend to have more of those roles lumped together into one role. And so, for example, in my current role, I do all of that.
Okay,
And
so if there was a recruiter that needed to fill, a UX role, then it would behoove them to understand that the scale of the company is going to be a relevant factor in how much ground you're going to be covering. At a startup, you're going to wear a lot of those hats.
yeah,
Whereas, if they're taking somebody out of Amazon, it's likely that they'll be a bit more focused. Is that right?
yeah, I think it's a conversation with a hiring manager on like where does this role start and where does this role end? Like, are you wanting this role to also be talking to the customers and doing research and doing interviewing and focus groups with them and
Mm-hmm.
learning those insights? Um, if not, then maybe that's a separate role. Maybe that's a UX researcher role. But if you do want them to be doing that, then have that conversation with the hiring manager. Like, what are you trying to kind of accomplish with this role? And likewise, on the other end of the process, when you're getting into the UI and the implementation of the software and handoff to engineering, how much of that are they doing? How much like prototyping are they doing? Or is that kind of a separate role? And so that's really just a conversation with the company and the hiring manager.
How can you suss out how good somebody is at UX design? Like if you were on an interview with them.
Yeah, so I've interviewed many designers. Generally, we look for portfolios. That's probably the biggest thing. Education is important, but really it's your portfolio, typically a website that you put together where you have a few case studies and a few projects. And in those projects, we really like to see process. We really like to see how this person thinks and how they arrive at some of their conclusions and their design decisions. Make sense? Do they follow a logical progression? Are they rooted in the actual customer and like what people are saying, or are they just arbitrary, right? So, and then is there anything measurable? Like, was there any impact in that design? Did it have any impact in the company's revenue or business metrics or anything like that? So we look at all those factors. Education is a little more secondary, but I will say this. If you have an actual degree in design, that carries more weight for me personally, because it means you've gone through a whole program versus like a boot camp.
Right.
My experience with people who have done boot camps is that they're not experienced enough yet.
Yeah, they have to kind of get experience from just time in the seat, as opposed to that, kind of methodological process that you would get at a design school. That makes sense. So communication, there's a lot of like tech jobs where you can kind of be heads down and not have to interact with too many people. But there's a lot of tech jobs where you have to be kind of like being interpersonally intelligent is a part and parcel of being successful in that role. So tell me a little bit about, if you're interviewing a possible UX hire, how important is their communication skills? Or is that like, do UX designers ever need to also get buy-in from, the engineering teams, or what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Like what challenges do you encounter as a UX designer? That's probably a better way of putting it.
I would say, to answer the first part of the question, I would say extremely, extremely important to have soft skills as a designer, because designers are, it's a very multidisciplinary role, and you really are interfacing with a lot of different stakeholders in the company, right? So you're interacting with potentially customers, you're interacting with, business level people, executives, product managers, product directors, and you're also interfacing with engineers, and you're also interfacing with the people on your own team. It's a highly collaborative discipline. It's highly social. There's a lot of ideas that have to get bounced around. It's not really a good position for people who are like super shy and introverted. Not to say that you can't be very successful, but it's sort of, you have to collaborate, and you have to be able to talk to a lot of different kinds of people and get along with them very well. For example, for me on a weekly basis, I'm talking to my larger design team and the product director twice a week, sometimes more. I'm talking to the engineers at least once or twice a week. On Slack, where I'm oftentimes talking to people from other teams and other departments. Sometimes the CEO is reaching out to me to bitch about something. So, I mean, you have to be able to kind of handle all of that. And it's definitely something we look for, is some good soft skills.
Okay. Cool, man. Let's see, a couple other questions that would be relevant to sourcers and recruiters. What kind of technology do you use? Is it mostly Photoshop, Illustrator, all of the above? Tell me a bit about just your tech stack.
Yeah, good question. It used to be Adobe products pretty exclusively. Nowadays, it's like almost completely dominated by Figma. Figma is a tool. Figma, yeah. So what it is it's a web-based tool.
Okay. I had a dumb dad joke, but I'm going to save it for my own heart.
You want to say it? Yeah.
No. Keep going.
Okay. So Figma is basically a mock-up tool and it's on the web and it's collaborative, that allows you to work on wireframes and mock-ups of software. And you can even prototype software in it. So you can even link together screens to create little clickable prototypes.
Mhm.
So it's very powerful. I mean, one of the things that makes it so powerful is that it's collaborative. You could have multiple designers editing the same files online because it's in the cloud.
Mhm.
As previously, you'd have a separate Adobe file, you'd have a separate Photoshop file or InDesign or Illustrator or whatever, and you'd have to kind of share those files. Now it's all on the web. It's all highly collaborative, easy to work on, and it's kind of changed the game. And at this point, I would say it's pretty much ubiquitous. Like almost every company in the world
Is
is using
using
Figma.
Figma. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, so when you think about like a UX designer who is,
Mhm.
you're trying to assess level, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
assess like, is this guy junior? Is he mid? Is he senior? Is he lead? Like, just very quickly, how would you segment or categorize the different levels of competence? What do you look for at each stage, or what do you expect to see at each stage?
Yeah, I would say like junior people tend to have a lot of the technical skills figured out, but then are lacking in like some of the soft skills I talked about because they just haven't had those opportunities yet to collaborate with a lot of different teams and to
Mhm.
deal with the constraints of software and deal with the constraints of what it's like to build software and work for a company outside of kind of like a dream world, right?
Mhm. Right.
So that's like a big difference between junior and more mid senior level. The other aspect would be like putting a little more of your ego into your designs. And I was guilty of this too when I was younger. There's this tendency to kind of create a design and be very proud of it and be very attached to it and be like, yeah, this is my baby. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, you have to kind of be able to look at it objectively and treat it like an inanimate object that you're designing, right?
Mhm.
Because what's going to happen is you're going to get all this input from different people, different stakeholders, engineers, and the design is going to change, and it may change drastically. It may not be half of what you originally intended it to be.
Mhm.
That's just the nature of how the design process works. You have to accept that, and you have to put less of your ego into it. And so
Which,
that's a big
okay, yeah,
difference.
yeah.
Go
Okay. And yeah, I imagine that's kind of like what you're kind of talking about is rejection, essentially, like being comfortable and flexible around not taking it personal that your amazing UX idea is being shat all over and asked to be iterated on. Is that right?
Exactly. It's being flexible. It's accepting that it's an iterative, like design is by its very nature iterative process. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's accepting that you have to
Yeah.
go through iterations. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I only have like one or two more questions, but other titles. What are some other titles that, we could like say there was someone who wanted to find a UX designer, but
Mhm.
maybe they're just having trouble finding somebody. Is there any other titles out there that are kind of unconventional but still the same job?
Prior to UX being a big thing, it was tended to be called interaction designer. There's
Okay.
still some companies that call it interaction design. And like even Google, I think, may still have that title for the role.
User interaction designer. I think I've seen that actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interaction, all kinds of different like combinations. And then I've also seen like experience designer that just cut off the user part,
Hmm.
which seems kind of vague, but in a sense, you are designing an experience. You're designing like a software experience. Um, yeah, there's also just kind of like some of these roles have the titles like information architect.
Hmm.
Sort of, it's one little piece of the UX design process. So I would be very cautious to put that title out there because it's sort of, I think it's a bit misleading. I think you want someone to be able to do more than just that part of the process. So
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
very narrow. It's very narrow. So I think the best thing if you're gonna give a role a title is to just stick with what the main convention is or the most common, which is user experience designer. Um, one other one that sometimes is used is just product designer.
Oh, okay.
And that's actually pretty common with a lot of companies too, because in a sense, you're also designing a product, right? Or even a service.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think that gets a little confusing too sometimes because you might be designing a physical product and you might have a role called product design. So I think user experience and user interface design is a lot more explicitly about software.
Hmm.
So that's what I would recommend in most cases.
Okay, perfect. Okay, last question, and I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for this. Hopefully you're gonna do something fun for the rest of your night, like sleeping. My last question is, you said you get hit up like every day by recruiters. So the ones that you respond to, assuming that you do respond on occasion, why do you respond? Like, what do you look for in a good in-mail? Or is there anything that comes, that kind of sticks out to you when you see it? Is it humor? Is it creativity? Is it, just pay or name of the company? Or what are you thinking?
It's a really good question. I think primarily the industry, because for me, and this is just personal to me, for me, I'm very passionate about educational technology. So when people are reaching out to me about these roles and like random other industries like finance or whatever, I'm not interested. And it doesn't matter if I get more pay or whatever, because I'm pretty happy with my current job. It's in the industry I like, and I have equity in the company. And so there's not a lot of reason for me to jump ship unless it's another company in ed tech that's even better positions. That's one factor. The other factor would be a lot of these people who reach out to me have a very vague, like they'll say like, we have a client that, it's probably a third party recruiting agency, right? So it's like, but it's like we have a client that's so-and-so
right.
500 company. And it's like, dude, I'm not even going to like respond to you because you're not even being transparent with me about like what the company is. But that's their way of kind of keeping it, they don't want you to go apply without them. So they're trying to keep it.
Right. Yeah. That whole part of the industry is like weird. And
yeah.
I don't know, man. I'm in a weird career, but it's still, it's a necessary one. So
yeah.
Anyways, cool, Blake. Well, yeah. Any final thoughts for anything I missed or anything you'd want sourcers or recruiters to be aware of about? I don't know, anything.
I don't know. I think we did a good job covering kind of a lot of bases. I think it's a very interesting space. There's a lot of interesting people. I do want to emphasize again that be a little cautious of the people who have only done like a little boot camp. They may show some technical skill, but they just may not have really had the opportunities to actually think through software, like real software.
Yeah.
And my experience, they've been pretty bad. So
compensate with years in the seat if they come from a boot camp as opposed to education.
Yeah, I would say definitely try to favor people who have gotten a 4-year degree or 2-year degree in some kind of design related discipline. Because they've had more time to practice it and think through these problems and stuff.
Okay, cool. Awesome, man. Well, I think that's probably good enough for now. Thank you again, Blake. And please return to Austin sooner than later, bro.
See you, man. 2 weeks or so.
All right, cool. 2 weeks. See you in 2 weeks.
All right, see you, buddy.
All right, bye.